That's how you silence a room. Hey, welcome. We are glad that you're here tonight, and others will be coming in. But we want to...
Mike is muted.
Mike's muted.
And now it's not. All right. We want to welcome you. We're glad you're here tonight. Others will be making their way in the next few minutes. And so we want to get started promptly because we're live streaming to those who are unable to attend tonight. So those of you who are on live stream, welcome. We're glad that you're here with us as well. I want to just give a word of instruction for church council members and for pulpit committee members. At the close of tonight, you will have available to you the copy of the report that we're going to review. And if you would see Kristen, she has those. I just handed them to her. She's promised not to open them until after the report is given, but that way you can have them to review. Our hope is to make additional copies available to the congregation on Sunday morning. And so if you're church council or if you're pulpit committee, you'll need those a little bit so you can take a look at them ahead of time. We have meetings coming up that you'll need that information at your fingertips. So just so that you are aware of that. We want to ask you tonight to pay attention to what you're hearing. There's not going to be question and answer time so much, but the information that you are about to hear is information, much of it that you've provided. Would that be correct? Yep. And has been assembled together by New Church Specialties. And so I think you're going to enjoy what you hear, be challenged by what you hear, be encouraged by what you're about to hear. And so I'm excited. I'm excited that you're here, and I'm excited to be a part of this journey with you. I'd like to ask Ed Armstrong if he would come. He's chairman, as you know, of our church council. And if he would lead us in an opening prayer. And then following that prayer, you're going to hear from Lonnie Bullock, who is here on the front row. He is the executive director for New Church Specialties, and he will make the presentation to you about your assessment report. And so can we stand together and as Ed leads us in a time of prayer.
Gracious Lord, thank you for so many blessings that you bestow on this congregation daily. Give us the ears to hear your wisdom this evening. Give us the hearts, open hearts, to listen and to move forward this church, this wonderful church, to lead this community in a spiritual journey that will be unlike anywhere else. And give us the strength, Lord, to be unified, to stay together and pray together and be in your Holy Spirit. In your precious name, amen.
Thank you, Ed.
All right, thanks, Ed. Well, hey, good evening. Hey, it's good to see all of you, and privileged to be able to be with you. As Ansel said, my name's Lonnie, and I have the privilege to serve as executive director for New Church Specialties. And for some of you, you've kind of heard about us, but you probably don't know anything about us, or much about us anyway. But we are an organization that's been around for 20 years now, and we've been working with churches all around the world, over 11,000 churches in the United States, and we've been in 35 different countries. It's amazing what God has done in opening the door. Prior to that, I served as a pastor within one of our a sister denomination called the Church of the Nazarene. In the Church of the Nazarene, I was 24 years as pastor, and then 20 years ago started doing this. And a friend and I started the company, and for the last 10 years, I've been the executive director of doing that. And so what I try to do is during the assessment reports for all of our TIPS churches, when I'd say probably 95% of the time, I get to come and deliver the report. So Darla was here. Many of you had a chance to meet her or at least see her when she was here for the weekend. And she and I collaborate together on writing the report. She kind of gives her observations, and then we write recommendations based on what she has observed and what you all have said to do that. So tonight is a presentation. Ansel mentioned that it's not a conversation, it's a presentation. So we have a threefold attack that we do with the assessment reports. We do a presentation, which is tonight, a digestion of the report, which is what will happen when you get it in printed form. And I would just say, if you would like to receive the report electronically, it is available in a PDF format. So if you'd like to get it on your computer or your tablet or your phone to look at it, if you let the office know, they can send you that link so that you can have that as well. But we want everybody that cares to have a copy of the report to digest it. And then following that, there's going to be the conversation. And Ansel will be leading that conversation, so he'll have all the answers to all your questions as you walk through the report in doing that. But we have found over these 20 years, this just is a good pattern. It works really well for us. When we first started, we tried to do presentation and conversation, and that just didn't work real well because people didn't get a chance to digest all the stuff and what that looks like. And so the reason we do a presentation first is because we want you to hear the heart of the report. And oftentimes, when you get an assessment report, you jump right away to the recommendations. You skip all the rest of the stuff, and you're going, well, I don't agree with that recommendation, or I don't agree. Yeah, because you didn't read the report, right? That's just what we always want to do. And so tonight, our focus is to help you to understand the why, so as you begin to have conversation about the what, it makes sense. And we've learned a long time ago that if we can understand the why, we're more likely to embrace the what. But often in the church, we jump to the what before the why. And often will cause conflict or people to disagree or fold their arms in despair or whatever it might be. And so we found this just works really well to be able to do that. So tonight, this is your report. It's not our report. I'll let you know when we turn to our observations and what we observed. But the vast majority of what you're going to hear tonight is simply your report. So as we begin, I just want you to know I am the messenger. All right, so if there's something you don't like or something you wish weren't so, I'm just simply delivering the news. I didn't make the news, you all did, right? Good, bad, and indifferent. It's your report, and as it should be in the process. Now, at the end, I'll share with you some of our observations and recommendations based on that report, but the vast majority of our time tonight is your report and sharing that. I mentioned to you, I've been doing these now for a lot of years. I can't imagine how many I've done, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these reports. And it's always interesting, the response that people have. Some people will say, oh, yeah, that's all right, we should do that. Or others are going, yeah, but I don't like it. Or that sounds like too much work, or that's too much effort. I just want to go to church on Sunday. I don't want to do all the other stuff. So we get all kinds of responses. We get it in that process. Our whole goal, the reason we're here, is simply because God's chosen the church to reach the planet, and there's no plan B. We're it. So we ought to be as healthy as we can to do this thing God's given us to do. And quite honestly, I've been around the church long enough now, and I've seen it just about in every expression you can imagine, from the smallest churches and the smallest communities to the largest cities and the largest churches. And it is very easy to get comfortable and inward focused and lose our mission that we're on, that Jesus has called us to. It's really easy. We don't mean to, we don't intend to, it just happens. And quite honestly, over the last 30 years, we have created within America, especially the Western church, a consumer mentality about church as opposed to a participant in the mission. So people begin to consume their worship service on Sunday, or they consume the program that's the church is offering. And if the church doesn't offer the program I want or do it the way I want, I'll go find another church to go to. It's that consumer mentality that it's like going to the mall. If I don't like that clothing store, I'll find another one. Or if I don't like that shoe store, I'll find another one. And as a result, we've created, instead of people on mission, we've created consumers of religion. And we believe it's done more damage to the kingdom of God than just about anything else I could imagine. Because Jesus made real clear that he came to seek and to save those who are lost. And his last departing words to his disciples was to go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them everything that I've commanded you, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and I will be with you always. Now, most of us like to jump to the end of that, right? We want God to be with us always. But we forget the if clause. If you're going, if you're raising up disciples, if you're teaching, if you're baptizing, then I'll be with you always. I'm in this whole, I'm writing right now a article on the ifs and thens of the Bible. If this, then this. And quite honestly, most of us that are consumers like the then without the if, without the consequence, right? And so part of our reason to be here is to help the church be as healthy as it can be, to be as effective as it can be, to reach lost and broken people. That we'd actually be on mission with Jesus. It's the only reason we exist. Quite honestly, if God would have allowed me, I'd have stayed pastoring my entire life. Man, the last church that I was at there for 13 years, and it was just a sweet spot of ministry. We had this incredible staff. We were seeing people come to Jesus in increasing numbers. It was just a great place to be. And quite honestly, I thought that's where I'd be the rest of my life. And then God had a different plan. And I said, God, as long as I have voice and an audience, I want to call the church back to the heart of Jesus. To ask ourselves, are we actually on mission, or are we comfortable and content? It becomes part of our challenge, right? And what that begins to look like. So I'm going to share some things that are going to be incredibly encouraging, because there's a lot of encouraging stuff about the church, and also some challenges, right, where we can improve. Because no matter how healthy we are, there's room for improvement, right? No matter where we are, what's been done in the past, there's always room for improvement. And so that's what we want to begin to focus on. How can we improve? How can we get healthier to do what God's asked us to do? I live in Phoenix, Arizona. That's my home now. People say, well, where are you from? Man, I'm from Arizona. That's where I live now. I've been in Indiana. I've been in Michigan. We lived for 13 years just outside of Chicago, south of Lake Michigan. So, all over the place. I've lived in Arizona longer than I've lived any place else. I just passed the threshold from when I was a kid growing up in Indiana, right? So now I've lived in Arizona longer. So right now I'm from Arizona, and I love being able to, when I'm at home, work with a church that's within driving distance of my house. Because I don't have to get on an airplane, I don't have to stay in a motel, I don't have to get a rental car. Some people think, it must be a lot of fun to travel. It's not. It really isn't. Man, this last year has been terrible in trying to figure out how to do things in creative kind of ways and what that looks like. So every motel room looks the same. It doesn't matter what state it's in or what city it's in. Every rental car looks the same. I mean, it's just a whole thing. So I intentionally, when I go someplace, like I came in a little early today, I got in about noon. So I had 3 or 4 hours before I had to be over here. So I've driven all over just to kind of see things besides a motel room, right? And there's a lot of beautiful things to see in this part of the country and what that looks like. But I love being at home, and I was in Arizona delivering a report in a town called Scottsdale. And we'd gotten done with the assessment report, and I was driving back home. I live in East Mesa, and so we had gotten back home. I pulled into my garage. It's probably about 9:30 or so at night. And I got in, as I was pulling in the garage, I began to have these incredible pains in my chest like I never had before. I thought, man, this is really weird. What is going on? And they wouldn't go away, and so I went in the house, and I went upstairs. My wife was already in bed, and I woke her up, and I said, Karen, I think you need to get up. I think I need to go to the hospital. Something's not right. So she got up, and she came downstairs. By the time she came downstairs, the pain had gone away. So I thought, no big deal, food I ate or indigestion or whatever it was. I said, just go back to bed. It's okay. I'm sitting on our couch in our family room, and you begin to get a little nervous. I get a little worried. If you've ever had those kind of things, I thought, man, what am I going to do? What should I do? What's the right thing to do? And I have a good friend of mine that's a medical doctor that attends the church that I do. Now, in the church, if you've had a mechanic, a doctor, a dentist, electrician, you're constantly asking, right, for advice about things. It just kind of comes with the territory and what that looks like. And so I have a good friend that's a medical doctor who's actually in charge of emergency medicine at the University of Arizona. And so I called him up, and he and I are really good friends. I said, hey, Dan, here's what happened. What do you think I should do? Yeah, he said, his first words were, what, are you stupid? I told you we were really good friends. That's the first thing he said. He said, you need to go to the ER because better safe than sorry, right? So I went back upstairs. I woke my wife up again. And I said, hey, I just talked to Dan. He thinks we should go to the emergency room. And so she got up, not quite the same attitude as the first time, but she got up and she came downstairs, and by the time she got downstairs, the pain had come back with severe intensity. I was having a difficult time breathing. I was having a heart attack. And we got to the hospital, and they go through all the stuff that they do there. And if you ever want to be seen quickly, have a heart attack. I mean, they just see you right away. They push you past everything. No waiting, and what that looks like. And so there I am. We go through the process. The cardiologist comes in and takes a look at the results and says, typically we do an angiogram now, but you've already flunked. We know there's something wrong. So we're going to go ahead and schedule you for emergency procedure to see what's happening. And so about 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning, they wheeled me into that cath lab, and you have to sign all the papers. They're going to try to open it with a stent. They may not be able to do that. They may have to do open heart surgery, or you may die. Sign this paper, right? What that looks like. And so, yeah. So there I am in the cath lab, and they start the process, and they went up through my wrist, which at that point I had never heard of before, because it had always been through the groin. I've been a pastor for a lot of years. I've been in a lot of hospitals with a lot of people going through a lot of stuff. I never, ever knew they did. They said, we're going to go up through your wrist. And I said, you're going to do what? And so they go up through the wrist, and they find the LAD. If you're familiar with it, it's typically called the Widowmaker. Usually when it blocks, you die. And the LAD was 95% blocked. And so they were able to open it with a stent. All was good. I got it done. I mean, if you ever done that with your wrist, they just let the pressure off slowly over a period of time. 4, 5, 6 hours later, they take it off. A couple hours later, you go home. So by 4:30 that next day, I was home. Thought, man, heart attacks aren't so bad. That's all it takes, right, to do that. And then you go in for the follow-up. You all know, you've been through these. You go with the follow-up because now you got to figure out what to do long-term. And so I go into the follow-up the next week to my cardiologist, and he gets all the test results back, and he says, man, your cholesterol is too high. It was 235. He said, you need to get your cholesterol down. You're a little overweight. You need to lose some weight. You need to add some physical activity to your life and do some things physically. And if you don't, you're going to have another cardiac event and you may die. And he got done with it. I said, now, Doc, how many times have you given that speech? He said, well, hundreds of times. And I said, how many people actually make changes because you gave a speech? He said about 30%. 70% of cardiology patients will not make lifestyle changes. They'll just have another cardiac event. I thought, man, you do exactly what I do. I spend my life giving speeches to churches, and quite honestly, people nod their head and change nothing. I said, I'm going to be one of the 30%. So I left out of there, and he said, now if I ate better, and if I exercised better, and if I lost some weight, I'd be okay. So I started at it. I started having single cheeseburgers instead of double cheeseburgers. I started having small fries instead of large fries, right? Eating better. I started taking the stairs instead of the elevator at the motels, getting a little more exercise. I went back a few weeks later, and they went through all the tests again. He said, man, you need to take this seriously. Nothing's changed. Your cholesterol is the same. You've actually added 2 pounds to your weight, and you need to take this seriously. I said, I did. Your program doesn't work. You said if I ate better and exercised more, I'd be better. Your program doesn't work. I said, man, that's exactly what churches do. Instead of making changes, they blame the presenter saying, your program doesn't work. It's not a program. It's a lifestyle change that requires incredible effort and work. Now, I made a strategic mistake. That second appointment, I took my wife with me. So she got to hear everything. And she said, now, you need to take this seriously. I said, okay, I will. I'm going to work on this. Now, I don't know if you've ever spent any time on the road, but I spend about 220 days a year on the road, besides COVID. Up until last year, about 220 days a year on the road. It's incredibly hard to get into exercise routines and eating good habits when you're on the road. It's just a challenge. And so, I was trying, but not making very much progress. And so this happened in October. So in February, the next year, I came home from a trip on a Saturday, and I pulled into my house, into my driveway, And I have 2 adult daughters, and both of their cars were in my driveway, which is highly unusual for them to be there that late at night, because my wife goes to bed at 9. I mean, it's like 9:30, and they're there. It's like, that doesn't happen. So I go in, and I figure out, what's going on? I thought maybe some news, something happened, and they were having an intervention. That's not what they called it, but that's what they were doing. They said, Dad, you need to take this seriously, and we're not leaving until you come up with a plan. You tell churches all the time to come up with a plan and not just a wish. To come up with some strategy instead of just hoping things get better. And so we're not leaving until they come up with a plan. They were serious. They were staying. And so I began to talk through what that would look like to get healthier. And my youngest daughter is a swimmer and a runner in high school, and she had graduated. She said, Dad, I want you to run a marathon with me next January. In Phoenix, we have this thing called the P.F. Chang Rock and Roll Marathon. Big deal. Thousands and thousands of people come from all over the country to run in this marathon. She said, I want you to run a marathon. I said, how far is that? She said, 26 points. I said, you're nuts. You see, I take very seriously the proverb that says, foolish is the man that runs when no one's chasing him. And what that looks like. That's just not right. I said, no, Dad, I want you to do it. I want you to go through the training. I want you to work hard at it. I want you to do that. We're going to run it together next January. Well, they weren't leaving, and so I agreed to it because I had no idea what I was agreeing to. Now, I'm not a runner. I don't care to run. It's not on my top 10 things I wish I could do every morning. But I said I was going to do it. So I called a friend of mine that goes to church with me who's a runner, and I said, Kevin, I'm going to run the P.F. Chang's next January. Will you train me? He said, I'll be glad to. He says, what you need to be able to do is run 30 minutes without stopping. Do you know how long 30 minutes is when you're running? Especially when you don't run. I'm running into the block and taking a coffee break or something, man. It's like 30 minutes. Because it doesn't matter how fast you do it. Doesn't matter how long it takes you to get there. But you got to run 30 minutes without stopping. So I started at it. I got to probably May or so. I finally called him up and said, I'm ready. I can run 30 minutes now. I said, I'm ready. He goes, you're not ready. You're ready to start training now. I thought, what have I been doing for the last 3 months? So they got trained. And then he sends me a spreadsheet every day with all kinds of things that had to happen. Core development and short runs, long runs, form runs, all kinds of things that had to happen in order to get ready. And it lasted until January the next year. I thought, there's no way in the world my life schedule will allow me to do that. But I had made a commitment, so I started at it. Now, it's a lot easier when it's the beginning days. It's a lot harder when it gets a little longer in the process. It's kind of like the church, right? We're going to outline some things that aren't quick fixes. And all of a sudden, you're just not going to snap your fingers and everything is going to be good. It's going to take a while. It's going to take some effort. It's going to take some energy. It's going to take doing some things to begin to get healthy. And quite honestly, some days you won't feel like it. Some days you'd rather just be comfortable than on mission. Because we all like to be comfortable. None of us like to be stretched. Well, there we are being stretched. And so I started this thing, and I'd made some goals for myself and made some commitments to myself that I wouldn't sign up for the marathon until I could hit the 9-mile mark without stopping. So I finally got to the 9-mile mark, and I said, okay, I'm ready to make a commitment to this thing. Well, just before I made a commitment, my daughter called me, and she said, Dad, I can't run with you in January. So what do you mean you can't run? She goes, we're pregnant. I said, thank you, Jesus. I thought that was the end of this thing, kind of like you all will do. You know, when's Ansel leaving? Because, man, we get that new pastor, we don't have to do this anymore. Right? That's not the case. You want to create a different environment. But then she said, Dad, I want you to still do it. I said, okay, I will. So then I get ready to sign up. I don't know if you've ever run a marathon or not, but you have to pay them for pain. I mean, you sign up and you have to pay them for the pain of running in their marathon. And then they want to know your pace, you know, how fast do you run? I'm thinking, I'm just trying to run without dying, man. I don't care how fast it is. And then, because they put you in these pens at different places in the starting line based on your pace. So I picked the slowest pace that they had so I could finish before they closed the finish line. because of my goal. I didn't want to get in anybody's way, so I was way back here and I signed up. And then it said, do you want to run the full marathon or the half marathon? Dude, I didn't even know that was an option. And so I said, man, by that time I was up to 11 miles. So I said, man, I can run 13. So let's sign up for the half marathon. So that's what I did. I signed up for the half marathon, ran my first half marathon. I've run 3 full marathons now and 4 half marathons since all of that. Not because I like running, but I like living a whole lot more than the pain. And I like eating, right? Now, I haven't been able to run for a whole year. I had some chemical burns on my legs from a chemical accident that I had doing some cement work, and so I've just now can stand up. I've been doing these reports sitting down for the longest time to do that because of the burns. It'll be another 3 months before I can start running again, and I'm still trying to decide if I want to. You take a year and a half off, it's hard to get back into it, right? It's kind of like the church. Man, we get into bad habits, and we just keep doing the bad habits, and it takes a lot of work to get back to the good habits again and what we're going to do. So I say, now what does that have to do with an assessment report for a church? Well, we believe the parallels are incredible. Because tonight we're going to talk about some of the good things. We're going to talk about some of the challenging things. We're going to talk about some of the things you can do to get healthier, but all of that will be a speech that will change nothing, no matter how much you nod your head tonight. No matter how much time you say amen to the thing. It will only change as we put in the effort. And I'm going to tell you right now, sometimes it's a whole lot easier to be comfortable than it is to be on mission with Jesus. Y'all know Jesus never called us to be comfortable. It's not comfortable being on mission with Jesus. It's not comfortable being the hands and feet of Jesus to a lost and broken world. It's not comfortable to love people like Jesus loves people outside of ourselves. It's not comfortable. But it's absolutely essential if we're going to be on mission with Jesus. So what are some of the challenges? What are some of the strengths? What are some of the weaknesses? All of those kind of things are things we're going to talk about today because y'all have a lot of positive news to build on, but some challenges to face as you move forward. So here's what it's going to look like over the next few minutes, more than a few. We're going to spend some time talking a little bit about this assessment report. Now, I always like to start with the whole picture at front so you know when we start, when we end, what that looks like. So we're going to start by talking about church health. Now, I'll let you know when we get to the church health section, we'll spend more time there than any of the other sections combined, just so you know. Don't get nervous, right? And what that looks like. I mean, the report is nearly 70 pages long. So we're not going to read 70 pages today. Aren't you glad? That'd be really boring to do that. But there's a lot of stuff. We're going to spend more time in the church health piece. We'll spend a little time talking about the life cycle and where the church is at the life cycle. We'll spend some time talking about statistics and what they tell us. We'll talk about the leadership summary. We had your church council fill out some forms, the staff, to help us understand personalities and leadership styles. We'll talk a little bit about that capacity. Then we'll talk about all those surveys that you filled out, the face-to-face interviews, the written surveys that you completed. We'll kind of do a summary of what you all said about the church and what that looked like. We'll spend just a few moments talking about what we call first impressions. These are from Darla, from her visit that weekend. Now, we get it. We've been doing this a long time during this whole COVID thing. Nothing's normal, right? I mean, everything is unusual right now in the church, so we get that. But it's important, just from a guest perspective, a little bit of what was experienced on that particular weekend. Then we'll talk a little bit about what we call the summary of conclusions. We'll draw you to that in the report so that you can know where that's at and really capture all the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight in a brief summary. And then we'll talk briefly. We won't spend a lot of time in the recommendations because the recommendations need to be digested and conversed about. All right? So those recommendations are our recommendations to you all. You all have to work through those and decide which ones you're going to embrace and what that's going to look like moving forward. That'll happen in the days to come, right? But I'll hit on them. We'll highlight those recommendations, and then you can digest them and then have conversation as we go through the process, all right? So let's start by talking about church health. Now, some of you may never have heard or even thought about the health of the church. You know, we think about it in our own bodies, right? There's certain tests that you do. the blood work and all the kind of things you do to kind of figure out what's going on inside of you and are you healthy or what are some of the challenges. We've tried to do that with a profile that was put together by an organization called Natural Church Development, NCD for short. Now, it gets a little confusing. We're NCS, they're NCD, completely separate organizations. Natural Church Development's been around for a little over 30 years now, and their whole premise was, let's focus on the root of what we're actually producing as church people. Because quite often, the focus is the fruit, right? I mean, I grew up in that era where everything was about getting people to show up at church. Success or failure in the church was determined by how many people came, how big the offering was, and what the facility looked like. Those are all wrong things to make a determination whether a church is healthy or not. But it became the only scorecard that we had, and as a result, you have a generation of pastors, of which I am a part, who have been trained, equipped, and encouraged to get people to show up instead of making sure we're actually producing followers of Jesus. So as a result, we've done all kinds of things to encourage a consumer mentality. I mean, I've done some of the stupidest things as a pastor. I mean, I've preached from the roof. I rode a horse to church. I had my tie cut off. I had pies in the face. Just anything you can imagine to get people to show up for the show on Sunday. And if people came to the show on Sunday, you must be a really good pastor. And if they didn't come to the show on Sunday, you must be a really bad pastor. And success or failure was made a determination by numbers instead of disciples. But what I've learned is Jesus was never impressed with numbers. Matter of fact, you remember when he fed the 5,000? It said after that day, a lot of people started following Jesus. They began to crowd in. One day he's walking, all these people he turned around and said, do you know what it's going to cost you to follow me? I've got to be the most important thing in your life. I've got to be more important than family. I've got to be more important. I've got to be number one. And the Bible says not many followed Jesus after that day. You see, Jesus was never impressed by the size of the crowd, but the heart of his followers. I mean, just think, Jesus had a group of 5,000 men, now not counting the women and children, but 5,000 men that crowded around to hear him speak. And by the time he left this earth, there were 120 in an upper room. I'm going to tell you, if you're pastoring a church of 5,000 and you grow it to 120, chances are you're not going to be invited anyplace else. And you certainly won't be on the conference circuit. Nobody wants to know how you did that, right? That's exactly what Jesus did. Because Jesus was always looking at the heart to make sure that people were going to be on mission. It's that 120 people, he said, I want you to wait in the upper room. I want you to tarry there until you receive the Holy Spirit, until his power rests upon you so that you can do what he's asked you to do. 2 years ago in June, I had the privilege to be in Israel, and I got to be in the upper room where tradition says it's where Jesus celebrated the Last Supper with his disciples, and it's also where they were gathered when the Holy Spirit came. And I want to tell you, I found myself in the middle of our tour group, off into a corner of that upper room, having a God encounter. And I said, God, I want your Spirit, fresh and anew. I don't want this to be about what we can do or what we can figure out or some program that we can put together. God, make this about you. From beginning to end, may our focus be you. I thought, man, what would happen if the church in America would be so unified, seeking the heart of God and the empowerment of his Spirit in a fresh, new infilling? What could happen? What would God do with people that are willing to do that? So it's getting to that place. So anyway, out of all that, Christian Sports said there's got to be a different way to do this. There's got to be a different way to take a look at the health of the church. So he did a research project, included 1,000 churches from around the world, and he said, what characteristics are there for churches that are actually making disciples, that are actually creating followers of Jesus? What are the characteristics? Out of that research, they identified 8 characteristics. They're listed here for you. It's things like empowering leadership, gift-based ministry, passionate spirituality, effective structures, inspiring worship, holistic small groups, need-oriented evangelism, and loving relationships. Now, the survey measures the adjective. So it's not the object, but it's the adjective itself. So in other words, the survey doesn't measure whether the church has leadership. It measures whether leaders are empowered. So it doesn't measure whether a church has ministry, but is it gift-based? Not just, is it a spiritual organization, is it passionately spiritual? And so the adjective becomes the measure of the survey, and the strategy has to address the adjective. So you'll see as we start talking about how do we help structures to be more effective, or worship to be more inspiring, or evangelism to be more need-oriented. And so the survey measures the adjective. Now, for all of you that are used to standardized testing in schools, that's not what this is. All right? So you have to get that away from your mind all of a sudden. Even though on the graph, on the slide, it's 0 to 100, the scale is not actually 0 to 100. Every year, they take all the statistics and all the churches that have done the surveys, they add those to the database, and they keep the mean of the survey at 50. So the mean of the survey is always 50, which means you can have a negative number some years or a number greater than 100. They adjust the highs and the lows to keep the mean at 50. They do that intentionally because the survey is designed to measure the church's deviation from the mean. Right? So it's not compared to any other church. It's compared to the mean of 50. How does your church deviate on how it answers and responds to the survey? So there's two numbers you have to keep in mind to understand the survey. The first is 65. 65 is considered healthy. So any characteristic 65 or higher is healthy, and to improve that area will just mean some tweaking and fine-tuning, not radical change. Now the other side of that is 35. So 35 is the unhealthy line. Scores below 35 require an absolute overhaul of a particular characteristic. So you begin to see the good news right away, right? All the scores for your church are all above the mean of 50. Some of them above the 65 mark. So what we do then is say, okay, we've got all these scores. Now, that doesn't mean we're done, but we want to get all 8 above 65, because here's the genius of the survey. 82,000 churches now that have participated in this survey. When churches score 65 or higher in all 8 characteristics, 98% of the time it's a growing church. Because the premise is simply this: healthy churches grow, but this is what healthy churches do. But not all growing churches are healthy. We want to pay attention to the root that's producing the fruit. And so the good news here, and we get really excited, actually, these are some of the highest scores we've seen of churches in pastoral transition. That's good news, man. That's exciting. Man, I just did a report last week, and the average score was 36. So you can tell that report was a lot harder than this one is going to be. So here, we're not talking about overhaul. We're talking about tweaks. We're talking about intentionally making decisions that'll help us to get healthy from a good starting place. You know, it's like, for me, I started at 235 and had to do a lot of work to get the cholesterol down to 120, which was what it was when I went back to the cardiologist this year. So it's a lot of work. Now, if you're at 130, you want to get to 120, it doesn't take quite as much work. That's what we're talking about here. We've got healthy indicators with just some areas that we want to pay attention to, but not overhaul, just some tweaking and understanding where we're at. Now, I know for some of you, this is brand new language, right? You've never heard of these things. It's new to you. And what those characteristics, what do they mean? How does it play out? Well, what the survey also does is to take these 8 characteristics and breaks each one down into 4 subcategories. All right, that helps us to identify what we need to work on in particular areas. So 8, the overall score, and then for each one, you have subscores. So starting with your minimum factor, that's why it's in red, that's the lowest factor, or we call the limiting factor for the church, which is gift-based ministry. So what do we mean by that? Well, if you take a look at the, we call the Insights Report, it breaks it down into 4 subcategories. It's integrating gifts into ministry. In other words, it's making sure that what people are doing in ministry actually connects to their gifts, passion, and call. It's amazing to me how many times people in the church will do things because nobody else will do them. It's not because I want to. It's not because I'm passionate about it, but I'm willing. I'm a willing volunteer to do that and doing that. Well, we believe the healthiest churches are the ones that allow people to do only what they're called, gifted, and passionate to do, period. Because the reality is, if you're doing something you're not called, passionate, and gifted to do, you're stealing somebody else's job or doing something God doesn't want you to do. Well, if I don't do it, nobody else will. Maybe it shouldn't be done then. See, if God gifts you, calls you, and you're passionate about it, then that's what he wants you to do and get engaged in that. Then we talk about significance of ministry. That's celebrating, understand that whatever I'm doing is valued and important in the church, where people are supported and equipped effectively for what we want to do. You'll see that all 4 subcategories are below the 65 mark, but yet above the mean line of 50. So again, it's not overhaul, it's just tweaking things, which could simply mean we want to equip people better, we want to support them better, we want to celebrate them more, or we want to make sure people have permission to stop doing things so that they can start doing the right things. See, we play this game in the church. Oftentimes, we don't know how to help people stop anything, so the only way they know to stop is to leave the church. I've had this all my life, and I can't get out of it, so I'm just going to find a different church to go to. Far better if we create an environment that says, listen, different seasons of life, we have different gifts and different passions and different calls. Just because I did this here doesn't mean I want to do it now or I should do it now. So, for instance, I was a youth pastor for a lot of years early in ministry. I love teenagers. I love students. I love working with them. I have a passion for them. But I'm going to tell you, if I had to be a student pastor these days, I would die. Man, I don't have the stamina. I can't imagine doing an all-nighter ever again in my life. That's a month recovery time these days. Doing that. It's just different, right? Different seasons of life, giving people a chance to move in and out of different kinds of ministries. So one of the greatest gifts we can give to people is give them permission to say, I can't, or I won't, I don't, I shouldn't. To say no to things that they're not called to, passionate, or gifted to do. I said that one night, and there was a lady in the back. She raised her hand. She said, are you serious? She goes, man, I've been the missionary leader around this church for the last 2 years, and I hate it. I quit. I said, I think it's a good idea. I think you ought to quit. I'm going home tomorrow. Oh, man, we got this gap now. What are we going to do, right? That's what people think. Well, if they don't do it, nobody else will. Now, that doesn't mean we're saying you don't do anything. It's find your gifts, your calls, and your passions and put yourself into that and what that looks like. And so, because if you're not passionate, gifted, and called, chances are you're doing a terrible job and everybody already knows it. I mean, chances are they're complaining about it, but not too loudly because they don't want to be asked to do it. Right? So it's the idea of helping people live into their gifts. So again, that's your limiting factor. So that's an area that we want to pay attention to. How do we help people understand their gifts? How do we give them permission to say yes to the right things by sometimes saying no to the wrong things they're doing? How do we equip them? How do we support them? How do we celebrate them? What would it look like to be able to do that? And so that becomes one of our focuses because that's the limiting factor, the minimum factor. The church can only go to the capacity of its minimum factor because that's the essentials. If you don't have those, you're in trouble. So we want to pay attention. Now, the second lowest score was in the area of empowering leadership. Again, below 65, but again, above 50. So, we're talking about fine-tuning and tweaking. So we want to look at those areas of opportunity. So, for instance, how well do we empower people? Empowering people means we trust people to make decisions without micromanaging them. And man, I tell you, the church is famous for micromanaging things. We ask somebody to do something and they have to get permission before we empower them to do it. Well, either we trust or we don't trust. Either we empower or we don't empower. and what that looks like. So that's what we're talking about, empowering. We talk about leadership fit, making sure people in the right place. Again, this one's above 65, so we're not going to focus on that. We're not going to pay attention to that. That just means people in leadership are in the right place based on their own passions and desires. Then we talk about delegation, though, because that's important. That goes along with empowering. Empowering means I trust you. Delegating means I give responsibility to you. And man, in the church, we're not talking about getting somebody to do a job. We're delegating responsibility for the ministry to do it differently than we would. Right? How many of you have heard the old adage, if you want a job done right, do it yourself, right? That's a death sentence in the church. And when you think about it, it's pretty prideful to think nobody else can do the job as well as you can. See, great are the leaders who find people that can do it better and empower them to do it and delegate responsibility to do it differently than somebody else might have done it in the past. And then we talk about the compelling vision, and the vision piece has to do with why we're here, where we're headed, what's our direction. Now, during every church in pastoral transition, there's always a bit of vision drift and vision confusion. It just happens. It's just a natural part of the process of saying goodbye to embrace the next chapter of ministry. And that's not personality. That's not about a pastor. That's just about a change that's happening. So how do we embrace that? What does that begin to look like? So you'll see in the recommendations, we talk about gift-based ministry and empowering leadership to increase capacity in those two areas. Now, the next one we talk about in that process is inspiring worship. Now, inspiring worship, you'll see that's 67. So all we're doing is looking for areas that we can tweak. What are the areas that are below? So you'll see personal transformation. In other words, application of the preaching, application of corporate worship is happening, where the church is seen as being guest-friendly, a good place for guests to come. Anticipation was the area that was below 65, so it's building anticipation for the future. Now, it's not unusual for that to be a little lower during pastoral transitions, because everybody's trying to figure out what's next, right? What's this all going to look like? So it's not unusual for that to be a little low, but working on anticipation. And then making sure messages connect, and we don't spend a lot of time there during pastoral transitions because we have no idea who you're talking about when you answer that question in doing that. But obviously, we want the messages to result in transformation and to have application to our lives. Then the next area we talk about is passionate spirituality. Again, because now we're moving above 65, these aren't areas we're going to talk about during the interim time. I just want you to understand the health of the church. Now, passionate spirituality deals with our own personal discipleship, our own personal walk with Jesus. So it deals with things like, am I experiencing God in my daily life? Am I passionate about the church? Am I passionate about my own personal quiet time and devotions with God? And do I have spiritual connection with other people? In other words, there's somebody I can talk to about spiritual things. And so you'll see all those scores that are close to the 65 mark. You know, the whole idea of passion for devotions would be the only one, but again, it's 60, so it's not unhealthy, but it's just encouraging people to find rhythms of life where they enjoy time with God, whatever that looks like. And those rhythms are different for each one of us. You know, sometimes people like early morning, some people like late afternoon, some people like late night, whatever that looks like. My wife grew up on the farm, and so early mornings is her thing. She is up at 4:45 every morning, and she spends an hour in her own personal quiet time, and that is not my deal. I did not grow up on the farm. I grew up in the city, man. So the whole idea of 4:45 is like, I'm just going to bed. Why would I want to get up so quick and doing that? So it's just different, right? I remember as a young pastor, you read all those books about, you know, great spiritual leaders that would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and spend 3 hours in prayer before they started their day. I tried that one day. It's not my thing. So you got to figure out your own rhythm, right? And what that looks like. Just because it may not be that rhythm, but find your rhythm. That's what we're talking about there. Then we talk about holistic small groups. Now, you'll see in holistic small groups, there's one area that's glaring. It's actually your minimum factor in everything, and it's below 35. So here's what we begin to conclude about holistic small groups. your current groups, whether they're Sunday school classes or Bible studies or whatever they might be, those that are part of those groups currently, they enjoy the people, they enjoy the community, they are open to people coming in, but the subject matter may not relate to daily life. In other words, you can study something and gain knowledge that has no impact. I've seen a lot of preachers preach that way. And I listened to a sermon going, dude, that was done really well, but I'm not sure what you said. Right? It was information without transformation. And so there'd be some indication that small groups would benefit greatly by taking a look at the content to make sure they're actually speaking into the lives of people that are attending and where they're at in their own journeys. The church that my wife and I are a part of in Arizona decided to do a all-church study on parenting. That was going to be our whole study. Small groups, sermon series on parenting, all of those kind of things. Now, this was after my kids were gone, and I'm thinking to myself, I do not need to go to a small group and learn how I messed them up. Right? That was not relevant to my life in that season of life. I'm done with that. I mean, that was our whole goal. My wife and I had a goal: raise our daughters so that they don't need years of therapy to overcome our raising. If we didn't mess them up too much, we're okay, because you're going to mess them up. And there's probably some here. But most places, there are no perfect parents. You know, we're always kind of making our own way through this thing, trying to figure it all out and what that looks like. And so it's that idea of making sure your groups are relevant. They're actually answering questions that people are asking. Where are they at in the journey? And what does the Bible say? What does God have to say about that particular area of my life? So that would be the area, because that is is the lowest factor of all 32 scores, was the group relevance score. Then we took a look at loving relationships. Again, we talked about passion, spirituality, be loving God. Loving relationships is loving and connecting with each other. Hey, the good news is you all like each other. I mean, who wants to go to a church where people don't like each other? Right? The good news is people feel affirmed, they feel accepted. There's deepening of relationships that happen. Conflict, for the most part, is resolved in healthy kind of ways. It's the relationship piece is very healthy, which is really good. So here's the good news: you love Jesus and you love each other. With that kind of foundation, some really cool things can happen, right? And what that looks like. And then the need-oriented evangelism. Again, we're up above the 65 mark now, and need-oriented evangelism means being a compassionate church. That's kind of a weird one. It's not whether we have feelings of compassion. It's, do I know the needs of the community, and am I intentionally trying to engage the community at their point of need? Right? That's what it means about compassion. And then we talk about corporate evangelism, personal evangelism, being seeker sensitive. Those scores, all of them above 65, which would indicate there's a real heart to reach lost and broken people. You're my kind of people. I mean that. Because sometimes we don't get that. Sometimes the heart has to be changed before we can even start talking about how to reach people. So that's great news that we have a passion. Now, whether we're being effective or not, that's a whole different deal. But we have a desire and a passion to do that. And if you can start with a passion, you can figure out the strategy. That's a whole lot easier than helping people figuring out the heart, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And certainly, this last year and a half has been weird, trying to figure out how to engage the community during this whole pandemic has been a challenge for every church. So what we're trying to encourage churches to do is be ready for the fall. We believe, and you can already begin to see it now across America, we believe as things continue to change, fall, the church needs to be ready to engage the community with increased passion. So it's planning for that. It's getting ready for that. It's don't wait until the fall to do it. Begin to figure out what that looks like today for what that can happen. Now, some churches are a little farther along. We've got some churches that are doing summertime stuff. because the COVID cases have gone down pretty dramatically in their communities, and different communities are opening up at different paces. All of those kind of things are happening all across America right now. And you all know, the whole vaccine thing is helping tremendously to get to that place, with, in the state that I live in, we're at 48% now that have been vaccinated, which is huge. Because if you add the 20 or 30% that have natural immunities because they got COVID, we're at herd immunity in increasing ways. Our deaths are near zero every day now, and what that looks like. And so we believe as the country opens at different places, the church ought to be ready to engage quickly. Don't sit around twiddling your thumbs and what are we going to do? Plan now. You can always make adjustments. If things change or whatever, you can always make adjustments, right? But it's better to do that now. So be in that need of evangelism. All right, so we take all 32 scores and we say, okay, what are the highest 5? And you'll see those there. Affirmation, encouragement, spiritual community, seeker-sensitive, effective planning, personal evangelism, commitment are your highest of all 32 scores. That speaks to the strengths of the church. And man, I can't tell you how excited we get when a church scores like that in these areas, because it's both inward and outward. Sometimes churches will score really high, but it's all inward focused. Here it's inward and outward, and that gets really exciting, what that looks like. So then we say, okay, we've got enough strengths, we got enough things going on. How do we increase the health? What does that look like? So we take a look at the lowest 4, and the lowest 4 are the areas that we talk about. I mentioned group relevance, which is kind of an anomaly of all your scores. It's the one that gets below the 35 mark, which would cause us to evaluate what that looks like. But then we talk about integrating gifts, conflict resolution, structures and systems, and anticipation for worship and building that were your lowest 5. So you're going to see in the recommendations some of these things we pay attention to. Now, we don't pay a lot of attention to anticipation for worship because we get it. This whole COVID thing has really messed up the whole corporate worship gatherings across America and where people are at and what that looks like. And we've had churches get in fights over whether wear a mask or no mask, or whether you have a corporate gathering or you don't have a corporate gathering. This has been one of the toughest years to pastor of any year that I've been in ministry, because no matter what the decision, somebody thinks it's wrong. And people have been nasty, not here, other places. Sending nasty emails and text messages and all kinds of things. Every church leadership is making the best decision they can with the information they have. Man, give grace. Be people of mercy. Nobody's going to get it exactly right. We're trying to figure this all out, right? And what that looks like. So we get the whole corporate worship gathering. There's some people, there's just not a pretty low anticipation right now because people don't want to come back different than they had it before. And that's a challenge for people. So we believe that anticipation is going to increase just naturally as churches get back to some level of normalcy over the next several months. Right? So that's in the area of church health. So you'll see this does inform our church health section pretty significantly when we make our recommendations in the church health area. But there's a couple of other areas that we want to pay attention to. So the overall health of the church is important. Then we look at statistics and life cycle to help us affirm the placement within the church health scores. So they all say the same thing. So we take a look at what we call the life cycle of a church. So every group of people have a life cycle. There will be a beginning and there will be an ending. Hey, this church will not be here for eternity. Every church the Apostle Paul started, no longer in existence. That doesn't make Paul an ineffective church planner. It just means things come and things go. There's this natural cycle to things. It's not chronological, it's attitudinal. It's when we move from outward to inward, when we move from being on mission to being comfortable, then we begin to move our way through the life cycle. So everything has a beginning and everything will have an ending. So what we have learned, it is possible to extend the life cycle and stay in that growth maturity stage if we do so intentionally. But it requires change to be able to do that. So what got us here won't get us back there. It'll just keep us here. So it's important to identify what do we need to do different. So we ask you some characteristic questions. We ask you to describe your church, and we gave you a whole list of things that you could score on a scale of 1 to 5. Where do you see the church? And so here were the numbers for you. Now, they won't mean a lot yet, but they will in just a second. So from birth to death, remember the scale is 1 to 5. So 1 being, that's not us, 5 being, that's us all the time. You'll see how you scored yourself in that process. And so what does that mean? Well, if you take a look at the 1s to 2s, which means it doesn't describe us hardly at all. Every once in a while, but not hardly at all. We would conclude the church is not just born and it's not dead. Right? Aren't you glad you came tonight to hear that, right? You're not born and you're not dead. That's good news. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves that. You're not dead yet. Sometimes the church can be the land of the walking dead. Have you ever noticed that? You know, people can just kind of go through the motions but not really be alive. Do that. That's not the case here. Then we take a look at the scores of 2 to 3, which means some of those characteristics are starting to show up, but they're not trending. They're not there in that place, just starting to show up. And so you'll see growth and decline are those areas that are beginning to show up. There's still some residue from the growth stage, and there's some decline that's beginning to show up. Now, we get it. It's COVID year, and it's a snapshot for where we're at. That's okay, to help us understand. Then we look at the 3s to 5s, because almost every church scores high in more than one area because it's a moving document. It's a living document. So we don't get stagnant or stale in one stage. We're always moving to the next stage of what that looks like. So if you were to take a look at the church, maturity and plateau are the characteristics that are most happening within your understanding of the church, which means the church it's completed the maturity stage and is moving into the plateau stage. And you say, well, why is that important? Because if you look at the life cycle placement between maturity and plateau, it is both a placement of great opportunity and also the placement of incredible warning. Because between maturity and plateau, comfort is the characteristic that we most often see. I like the way it is. Right? Because we all get in stages like that in our life, right? You've probably been there some yourself, you know, a different stage, a different season of life where you go, man, that's where I wish I could hang out. Then birthdays come. You know, life changes. All of a sudden we find ourselves in places that we weren't really looking forward to, but here we are, right in the middle of it, right? It's kind of like that in the church. So here we are between the maturity and plateau stage, and it's a great place to be because of we have resources, we have passion, we have desire, but also it can be a place of comfort where there's a temptation to avoid risk and not try anything new. Why should we? We're comfortable. Why should we do things differently? We're comfortable. And comfort is both a good place and also a huge warning light that should come off in the church. You know, like when you're driving your car and the check engine light comes on? We need that in the church. Warning, warning, warning. Listen, if you get too comfortable, then nothing's going to change, and it won't be long until you're in the decline stage. Remember, there's already characteristics starting to show up. So we move that maturity plateau stage, and we get into the decline stage, and the problem is when you get on the right side of that life cycle, that's where the momentum picks up greatly. It's not chronological. You can say, well, it's taken us this long to get to this stage. No. Once you get beyond the plateau stage, the momentum, negative momentum, picks up this incredible speed. And so it's right now, it's a great time to say, how do we get back into the growth zone? How do we get back into that place where we are on mission with Jesus in the midst of our comfort? Again, great place to be as far as resources and people liking things, but also a great opportunity to say, what's next? What would the future look like if we embrace that? So, given the church health scores, And given the life cycle placement, we would say the church is probably closer to maturity than, to plateau than maturity. And you can see that as you begin to unpack the statistics. So this is the attendance statistics for the last 10 years. And you'll see when you look at that, the church has been basically plateaued with a little spike here, a little down there, a little spike here, a little down here. That would indicate a plateau stage, because the margin of that is within 20 people. Bump up a few, go down a few. Bump up a few, go down a few. We call that the comfort zone. The comfort zone for this church is somewhere between 210 and 230. If we can stay at 210 to 230, we can do our programs, we can have the ministry we want, we can pay a pastor, we can keep the building up, we can do what's going to keep us comfortable. And whenever you get to the edge of having to make decisions to move beyond that comfort zone, oftentimes that's when you begin to see the dip again. We don't do it intentionally. It's our desire, our passion to maintain balance. And most of us like balance, right? And so whenever it's going to get uncomfortable, that's when we begin to say, well, let's not do that. And then we get back into our comfort zone. So we would say, statistically, attendance-wise, would more affirm the plateau stage than the maturity stage. That we've moved into that stage of the life cycle. Now, here's some incredibly good news. You ready? Your giving has remained different than everything else of the survey. Because for the last 10 years, the trend has been upward. That's good news, man. There's strong support for the church financially. And given the church size and its annual income, the per capita giving here is better than 90% of the churches in America. That's good news. That's exciting, especially given the economic condition of the community. I mean, it's amazing when you think about it, which would indicate there's a high level of commitment to the church, which is really exciting. Now, if you take those resources and tweak them a little bit and begin to figure out how to engage people more effectively, all of a sudden you get back into the growth zone. Again, this is an overhaul. This is tweaking the right things to be able to do that and what that would look like. All right, so those three things, church health, life cycle, attendance, and giving statistics, give us a picture of the big picture of where the church is at. So then we said, okay, let's figure out, we call it the leadership capacity profile, where we take a look at the leadership of the church. This is pastoral staff and council. Right there it is, man. Suits and ties, just like that, right? So here's the reality. If you're on the council or you're on the staff, don't take anything you're about to hear personally. It's just a reflection of who you are. It's not a judgment of who you are, because all of us have different skills that we bring to the table. We're just trying to figure out how balanced they are, because it takes all kinds of different things to make a church go forward. Now, I can tell you, just based on leadership profile, the church leadership structure is designed well to get the results you have right now. Maturity plateau, maintaining where you're at, managing well, it's set up to do that. Now, we want to know about the capacity to move forward. What does that look like? And so what we did is we took a look at what we call leadership style. Now, there's not bad or good here. This is just leadership style. And so we asked the church council staff to figure out fill out some profiles to help us identify their leadership style. And there's several different leadership styles. We talk about what we call the pioneering leadership style. Pioneering leaders are the ones that are the risk takers. Their whole philosophy in life is, why not? Right? Let's give it a try. Because in the church, you have why not people and why people. Right? The why not people are always moving forward. The why people are going, why are we doing that? Man, why do we have an interim pastor? Why don't we just get a pastor? Why don't I? Right? It's that whole idea. Pioneers are the why not people. Then you have what we call strategic leaders. Strategic leaders can take future plans and put a system together to make them become reality. So they take the dreams of the pioneers and make them a reality. So you'll see there's nobody on the leadership team that currently has strategic as a leadership style. Doesn't mean they're not strategic, it's just not their leadership profile. Then you have 0 leaders with management style. In other words, the managers of what is. Then you have 4 that have the team leadership style. Team leaders like to collaborate and come up with a plan together, as opposed to individual pushing. Typically with team leaders, risk-taking is highly undervalued in what that looks like. And then you have 1 leader with pastoral leadership style. Pastors are just people leaders. They care desperately about people. And then you have 0 leaders that are the encouraging leaders. Encouraging leaders are the cheerleaders. They're the ones that can get everybody focused on the future and really begin to move forward and what that future looks like. Again, this is not a criticism. This is just the current makeup of the council and leaders. And so what we have to do when we think about this transition period and the transition team, we're asking ourselves, who are the managers, who are the pioneers, who are the strategic people that we need to add to that team to make it as balanced as we can? Because balance is what we're looking for there and key. So then we ask this is just the church council. We ask them to evaluate how effective they see themselves working together as a team. You'll see that they scored above average as far as effectiveness as a group of people. Well, that's really good because sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes not here, other places. We actually have people that serve on church councils that don't want to. They'd rather not do it. There's just nobody else will step up and what that looks like. So good news is there's a level of effectiveness. Then we took a look at spiritual gifts. What are the spiritual gift makeup of the leadership team? Hospitality, mercy, giving, encouragement, teaching, and evangelism were the gifts that were most strong within the leadership and staff. All right, so that's really important to know. And then we ask which ones are missing. The apostle, leadership, administration, shepherding, service, and craftsmanship. You'll notice between the leadership styles and the spiritual gifts, the very same things are missing. The administrative gifts, the leadership gifts, the apostle gifts, which is the pioneering kind of leader as well. So what does that mean? Well, the spiritual gift mix of the current leadership team is designed well to make people feel welcome and accepted, to be compassionate towards the hurting, cheerfully contribute to the work of the Lord, and be able to clearly explain and apply the Word of God, which are all your strengths when you look at your church health scores as well. What it begins to indicate for us is the leadership team may struggle with leading in creative and innovative ways, especially if it involves risk and what that looks like. All right, so that's the current leadership team. Then we took a look at personalities. Now, every time I do this, I have to tell myself in the back of my mind, don't spend time here, just move on. All of my graduate work is in counseling, and so I become a student of people. I try to figure people out. I try to figure out their personalities when I'm around them for very long. It's a curse sometimes. Just trying to figure out, that's why they did that. That's why they did that, and what that looks like. But there are 4 basic personality types no matter what profile you use. You can use the DISC, which is the dominant, influencer, steady, compliant. You can use the animals, the golden retriever, the otter, the beaver, the lion. Or you can use, like we do, Litauer's language, which is the cleric, sanguine, melancholy, phlegmatic. People say, well, which profile is the best? Well, there's really not a best. They all do the same thing, and they give good results. We use Litauer's because we have a partnership with them, and they let us do church people for free. That's it in doing that. But it's important to know and understand. So 4 basic personality types using Litauer language. The cleric are what we call the gas pedal in the church. They just want to get to the bottom line and make decisions and move on. The sanguines are the creative people. They don't care how long meetings are as long as they're having fun. I mean, you can always tell a sanguine because they're always party people. They just like to be around people. They're the people you invite to your party because they'll keep things going. They can come up with tons of ideas. They may not remember them the next week, but they'll come up with ideas, right, in doing that. Then you have the melancholies. Melancholies are the perfectionists. They're the detail people. They can tell you 10 reasons why something won't work without ever thinking about it. They're the brake. We call the sanguine the engine. We call the cleric the gas. We call the melancholy the brake. Then you have the phlegmatics. The phlegmatics are the peacemakers. Their whole focus is just making sure everybody's happy. Their whole motto in life is, can't we just all get along? Why do we have to fight? Why? And so they are what we call the climate control of the church. They want to make sure everybody's okay. You can always tell phlegmatics in a meeting. They're always worried, too hot, too cold, need something to drink? Yeah. You can always tell those folk that are always concerned about the people dynamics of any meeting. So here's what we have in our current leadership. You'll see the average scores. You have 1 that's sanguine, 3 that are choleric, 1 that's melancholy, 2 that are phlegmatic. The challenge is, though, your cholerics are not strong cholerics. So you'll see the average score for everybody. The strength is in the phlegmatic melancholy, which means peacemaker, detail people, which would result in board meetings that can be a little long and decisions that are a little difficult to come to. Because phlegmatics have learned the secret in the church to delaying decisions. I think we need to pray about that before we make that decision. Because prayer is always okay in the church. Right? But sometimes it's a delay tactic because we don't want to make a decision, quite honestly. And so now, it's not that one's better than the other. It's all the personality types working together where the team functions the best. And so again, because we're missing some of the creative leadership styles, we're also missing some of the creative personality styles. And so part of putting together the transition team is to make sure you have some creative, energetic people that are the why not people. In doing that. Again, it's all about balance. So sometimes, you don't think that personality style is a good one. I'm not going to say that. All personality styles are great. It's just a matter of balance and what that looks like. I'm married to my opposite. I am a choleric sanguine. My wife is a melancholy phlegmatic. I'm going to tell you, the first 3 years of our marriage were the most interesting years of my life. I tried to fix her for 3 years. The problem was she wasn't broke. Just so you know, that didn't work out so well. Just so you know, I would not advise that. Because it wasn't until we really began to embrace and appreciate what each of us brought to the table that we're able to be a lot more successful at doing life together. And that's what we're talking about here, is in making sure we have the balance. That's a part of that. Then we began to ask all those surveys. You remember those things that you filled out online or in person, and the face-to-face interviews that you did. We asked all kinds of questions, open-ended questions, asked you to rank things. Some of you got sick and tired of it and complained about it and all those kind of things. It's just part of the process of doing that. Well, we had 54 written surveys that were completed, and we did 42 face-to-face interviews for a total of 70 different people that participated in this portion of the assessment, which is a great percentage of your adults currently attending. It gives us a great example. Our goal is always 30% of the adults attending, and we were able to hit that a little better at doing that. So we believe the results are really accurate. So who took the survey? Who's a part of that? Well, here's the age breakdown. You'll see that it matches the demographic of those that are in the room right now as well. What that looks like. In trying to figure that all out, greatest number of 50 and over that participate in the survey, because that's who attends the church, right? And what that looks like gives you a little breakdown. Then we asked the question, male, female. We had 59% female, 41% male. That's the average. Across the United States in the church, it's 60-40. So we're right at average number of female and male that completed the survey. Then we asked the question, how long have you been a Christian? Well, you'll see 86% have been Christians longer than 25 years. In other words, the church is made up of people well established in their faith. Then we asked the question, how long have you been attending this church? All right, been a Christian that long. And we didn't say Christian, we just said, how long have you been a Christ follower? We let you define what that meant for you to do that. Then we said, how long have you been attending this church? You'll see there, when we got to that place, you'll see the vast majority of people, over 50 or almost 60%, have been here less than 10 years. So you'll see that a lot of folk have come, 20% in the last 5, 36% in 6 to 10 years, 8% you'll see that it's a good representation of people that have been attending this church relatively new and for a long time. But now, if you go back to this slide, 86% have been Christians longer than 25 years. Okay, I want everybody to hear now, because there's good news and there's some bad news. Here's the bad news. The people that you've been reaching have been people well established in their faith at about 50 years and older. In other words, if you were to identify a profile of the people this church is most likely to reach, it'd be 50 and over people that are established in their faith already. Now, if we believe our purpose is to reach lost and broken people who don't know Jesus, we have to acknowledge that our effective rate has been less than our heart's desire. Our personal passion doesn't measure to the effectiveness. Aren't you glad you came tonight? Get that encouraging word. Here's what I've learned. If we don't tell the truth and begin to speak the truth, nothing ever changes. Unless we begin to say, listen, we got it. You're passionate about it, but that passion hasn't translated into results. So that means in order for us to be more effective at reaching lost and broken people, now we get it. We're serving the community. We're engaged. We're a part of that. But the results are not people coming to know Jesus. So then we have to ask, what needs to be done differently? What needs to be changed so that we can be more effective at actually reaching and engaging lost and broken people? Now, I can tell you that messes everybody up because we're comfortable. We like what we're doing. What do you mean we're going to change? Let me just tell you, change is not a swear word. I mean, we got to embrace that change because the church is designed to be a living organism that's constantly changing. And if we don't change, then we die. And we can die very comfortably. But let's not kid ourselves to say somehow we're on mission with Jesus. Because we're not. Doesn't mean we don't have a desire to. It just means we've got to figure out how to make it more effective, right? And what that begins to look like. So then we begin to say, okay, let's figure out the demographics. Let's figure out who goes. And so we looked at the age demographics, male-female makeup. We looked at the married. 81% of those that participate in the survey were married. Traditional family is the group that you're most likely to reach. So if you were to kind of summarize it, 50 and over, established in their faith from a traditional marriage. Those are the people that we're most likely to reach currently. So then we have to say, okay, what does the community look like? Now, let me just tell you, of every church we've done, this was the only church that had a majority of its people living within 2-mile radius of the church. I know. It's amazing to me because the vast majority do. So we said, okay, if that's the ministry impact, let's figure out who lives there in that 2-mile radius of the church. So this is 2-mile radius from the church. This is what this population breakdown does. Now, we get it. These are 2010 with 2020 updates. We don't have the 2020 census yet. It'll be released a little later this year or the first of next year before we actually have those statistics. It's always fun for us. If you're a numbers geek like I am, we can't wait to see what happens and what that looks like. But given those updates, the estimated population of that 2-mile radius is 4,182 people. The projected growth rate in that area is 1%, which means it's pretty stagnant as far as that 2-mile radius goes. The angular population is 88%, which matches the church. And doing that, you can see the population under 18-year-old compared to the U.S. average, and that's what we like to do is compare. The reality is with an average age of 48, it's nearly 9 years older than the average age in America. That's important to know because remember, you're reaching 50 and over, and guess who lives in your community? A lot of people 50 and over, right? And what that looks like. And so the challenge of trying to figure out, are we matching up to the community, is to realize the group that we're missing are the unchurched. those not connected. Now, 14% of those that live in that 2-mile radius are college graduates. And you look at the average income, household income, the average is $55,000 compared to $93,000 or $94,000 in the United States. So you'll see that the economic reality of the community is a lot less than the average across the United States. That's why the giving to the church is such a remarkable story and what that looks like, and to do that. 40% have no faith involvement. That means they don't go to church. They've never gone to church. They don't even know a church. They don't know a pastor in the community. Then you have what we call the moderate faith involvement. That's about 24%. Now, moderate faith means I went on Easter 10 years ago or whatever it was. You know, if somebody asks me what church I belong to, that's a church I would name, but I probably haven't been there and I don't know who the pastor is and what that looked like. 36% have a strong faith involvement. I'm going to blow you away because strong faith involvement in this survey simply means somebody goes to church at least once a month. All right. Now, I grew up in a Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night tradition. And if you didn't go to Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, you're pretty sure you're going to hell. You know, that's the importance of that. Well, it's a changing world today, and church attendance is changing dramatically, and how people define that. And so just in that survey, which was done by Pew Research, simply ask people, do you go to church at least, or are you involved in one religious activity per month? Doesn't even have to be a worship service. It could be a Bible study they go to. It could be a Christian concert they go to. It could be anything once a month. And so you'll see that in the area here, we always look at that 60 to 70% as your target of what that looks like. If you're looking at 60 to 70% of those that either have a very little faith involvement or no faith involvement, you can begin to see there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people within 2 miles that don't have a church connection. That's our mission field, right? Whatever the exact numbers are, that's our mission field. And to be able to understand that is important. Now, we ask, part of the company that we use here, they use 5 different sources of information to gather their data. And one of the things that they do is talk about a profile of the community of what kind of worship style is most likely to connect with those that live in that community. And that was a somewhat contemporary worship style. Now, we're not talking just about music. We're talking about how worship is done in a contemporary kind of format, from preaching to ministry to connections to small groups. All of those kind of things play into that contemporary format of what that looks like. So kind of gives you an idea of the community compared to the church. That's our mission field. We got to be able to understand it. You'll see one of the recommendations we're making deals with doing a community needs assessment and really trying to figure out, are those numbers correct or aren't they correct? You know, do we really have a lot of folk around us that are unchurched, and how do we engage them in friendship and relationship for the purpose of having spiritual conversations? Y'all know confrontation evangelism doesn't work anymore. And I grew up in the era that it did. I mean, we had Thursday night calling nights as a kid where you go knocking on somebody's door and say, hey, if you were to die tonight, would you go to heaven? I mean, talk about confrontation. Or if you stood before Jesus and he said, why should I let you in? What would you say? You know, that's all in the first 2 minutes of knocking on somebody's door on the porch. Right? That doesn't work anymore. Matter of fact, it'll get you shot. Yeah. So the whole idea is, how do you build relationships? How do you build friendships so that you can have spiritual conversations? People belong before they believe these days, so it's important to create an environment where people can belong, where they can feel welcomed, even with their warts, even when they don't act like you or talk like you or smell like you. It's creating that kind of a climate and what that looks like. All right, then we took a look at what we call current priorities. We just ask you to rank them on a scale of 1 to 7, 1 being the most important thing, 7 being the least important. We said, what are your current priorities? Worship, prayer, fellowship, community service, discipleship, evangelism, and international missions was the order that you planted those 7. Then we said, what would you like them to be? We call them the preferred priorities or desired priorities. worship, prayer, discipleship, fellowship, evangelism, community service, and international missions. Hey, do you notice something here? They're about the same. In other words, we're comfortable. We like our reality. We're good, right? I told you, comfort's a great place to be, but it's also one of the most dangerous places for the church to be, because our passion to reach lost and broken people doesn't necessarily translate into action. We can talk about it, but do we actually do things to be more effective at reaching lost and broken people? Then here's where we got a little worried, because we asked the question, do you think your church needs to change? No commentary, just look at the numbers, right? The reality is we are incredibly comfortable. And any change introduced has the potential to be resisted. So here's where we begin to help people embrace the concept of being a living organism that's always changing. And if we're not changing, we're dying. But I'm going to tell you, it's not going to be as easy, because it's our reality of what that looks like. So given that, then we ask the question, how open are you to outside assistance? How receptive are you to an assessment report? How receptive are you to have an Ansel here that's going to engage in some conversations on how to be more effective? What does that look like? Well, you can begin to see the change and needs help are very similar. So we said, does the church need intervention? Nope. Does it need help now? Nope. Does it need help soon? Nope. In the future? Maybe. Or no, we're good. No help. I'm going to tell you, those two slides speak to the comfort level of the church. Good place to be, but man, it's a dangerous place to be. Because we'll have a tendency to resist anything new and different. And actually tempted to complain about it. Whose idea was that? Right? But the reality is, if we're going to be more effective, if we're going to increase our health, then some things have to change. And it won't be easy all the time. And you may not want to do it all the time. It's a whole lot easier to sit and eat the double cheeseburger than it is to run a mile. Right? It's a whole lot easier to just put my feet up at the church and be comfortable. Enjoy the worship service. Don't mess me up. Don't mess it up. Right? And what that looks like. So we get a little nervous now because we know that the potential for resistance is pretty significant to any kind of change. Then we want to get a feel for personal commitment to the church. Are you willing to help? Are you willing to get engaged? This got a little more encouraging because about half the folk are willing to engage, are willing to do what they can to be able to help the church as it goes forward. You do have some that are tapped out or close to being tapped out. They don't have a lot more time, a lot more energy that they can give. But it seems to be that there are some folk that are yet untapped in their potential. So it's how do you figure out that balance, right? And how do you help people in the area of gift-based ministry to do that more effectively? Then we also talked about giving, because the giving is such a strong piece. We wanted to figure out, are we at the max as far as giving? Hey, this is the good news, man. I'm going to tell you, you all love your church. I mean, you really do. I mean, this whole idea of, man, being generous and even helping beyond my tithe, that's pretty strong based on your giving history to do that. So that's pretty exciting to see that. So there is a level of personal involvement as long as you don't change anything. And a level of giving as long as you don't change anything, right? So that's a challenge for us, is to make sure that whatever the future looks like, that we help people come along in the process to be able to embrace that fully in doing that. Then we had some open-ended questions. We just gave you a blank piece of paper, and we said, hey, what do you think the church does really well? You could write down anything you wanted to write down, and you did. We had volumes of stuff that we had to work our way through. And so what we do is we work through all those written comments, and we put them together in themes, and begin to identify the things that were mentioned by other people. And so for us, in order to get the list, it had to be at least 10%. And so we know at 10%, we're getting to a trending. Once you get to that 20 or 30%, we know it's a trend. It's an actual reflection of the current reality of the church. So you'll see here, community outreach or involvement, welcoming, preaching. Let me just say something about welcoming. Every church we work with thinks itself welcoming. Right? We've never had a church say, we're pretty unfriendly around here, we don't like people. Right? So every church is welcoming, we get that. And the reason you believe you're welcoming is because people that stay tell you you're welcoming. But what about the people that didn't stay? They're going to a church down the road that's welcoming and friendly. Right? So don't get too impressed by that, because every church we work with thinks itself to be welcoming and friendly. Preaching, loving, caring for one another, youth ministry, Sunday school, communication, and music were the things that were mentioned most often. Then we asked the other side of that coin, and what are some of the hindrances? COVID, that's made the list this whole year in every church that we've done. Aging congregation, lack of volunteers, building size, and lack of youth pastor were the things that were mentioned most often as hindering the church's ability to move forward. Then we asked the question, what goals would you get excited about? If you could get excited about any goal, what would that be? Reaching younger demographic, recapture pre-COVID momentum, focus on youth ministry, finding a new pastor, and expand the building capacity were things that were mentioned most often. Here's the reality. Okay, you ready? Put your seatbelts on. I'm going to shoot straight. You will not reach a younger demographic unless you change. And y'all already said you don't want to change. Right? I didn't say that. You all did. But the reality is, if you're going to reach a different crowd, that means you have to do things a little different way. Because you're perfectly positioned to reach those you're currently reaching. To change that demographic or that target will require things to be done differently. And I don't mean compromising message. Man, our message needs to be clear, and our methods must not mute the message. Our methods must magnify the message, which means our methods have to always be changing to connect with the lost and broken generation that we're ministering to, and what that looks like. So I hope you hear me. I say it in love, but I'm going to tell you, those goals will never become reality doing what we're currently doing. Because we're perfectly positioned to get what we've already got. But to do something different will require things to be done in a different way. All right, is that clear enough? All right. I told you, I'm the messenger, don't shoot me. I see those looks, what that looks like. All right, then we asked the question, how would you describe your church? What's the character? That was not positive or negative, we just said write down whatever you want to write down. Welcoming and friendly, got it. Loving and caring, we're stagnant, we're old-fashioned, we're traditional. Were the things that were mentioned most often. Not as a complaint, because you're already comfortable with it. Comfort leads to stagnation, right? I mean, that's just our reality when we get too comfortable. Then we said, what do you think the purpose of the church is? Reach the lost, discipleship, community service, loving God. Now, I kind of mess you all up. If you go back, when you get this report and you go back to the slides that say, what are your priorities, preferred and current, you'll see that evangelism and discipleship, reaching the lost and discipleship, are the lower portion of your preferred priorities. But yet you say it's the very purpose of the church. So the only logical conclusion we can make is we are not fulfilling the purpose we believe the church is here to do. No matter how much we like it, no matter how comfortable we are. Now, I didn't say that. You all said that. I mean, just by the way you answered the questions, right? And what that looked like. And then we said, what would you like to change? Well, develop quality youth program, encourage small groups, bring back Sunday school, develop a vision for the future, were things that were mentioned that even began to get to the trending mark. Then we said, what's the church's reputation in the community? It appears that the church has a really positive reputation within the community, that it's seen as a good place. It's involved, it's welcoming, it's helping, it's positive. There's no negative things at all here. So most of us would believe, and no reason not to believe it, that the church has a great reputation in the community. Now, the good news is if you leverage that reputation to engage lost and broken people more effectively, man, you have unlimited potential. It's not like you got to overcome a bad reputation and what that begins to look like. So that's good news. And then we said, what are the felt needs in the community? Youth ministry, a place to belong, financial struggles, food were some of the things that were mentioned most often as what you felt the needs of the community were. Then we got to the place where we said, okay, you're going to get a new pastor. What are the desired strengths? What would you like to see? Here's some of the things that you mentioned. Somebody that can preach, that's always good. Right? I mean, who does? Hey, that's good news. I can see. Thank you. So preaching, cares for people, embraces community outreach, connects with all ages, leadership and administration, personable and biblical knowledge were the things that you would describe. This does begin to shape a profile for the kind of pastor you would look for as you begin to identify candidates in doing that, which are all healthy, good things to do. Then he says, what keeps you in the church? What keeps you engaged? People and relationships, spiritual growth, music, worship, ministry involvement, leadership, fellowship, small groups, preaching, and community outreach were the things people mention most often as the reason they stay engaged in the church. So here's the bottom line of all that. Y'all love Jesus, you love each other, and you love your church. And really, we believe you love your community. You really do. The challenge is, how do you engage the lost and broken of your community more effectively so that you can have spiritual conversations and see people come to know Jesus? I mean, just break it right down. I mean, there's so many great things and so much potential to leverage that in the right way. It can be dramatically impressive. I mean, you can really help build the kingdom of God. Because you have so many good things that are going on as long as your comfort doesn't get in the way of your progress, of being able to reach that potential. Because potential is a terrible thing, right? Potential unreached just becomes a curse. See, potential reached begins to have kingdom impact in some pretty dramatic ways. And so it's reaching that potential that becomes a part of that. Now, let me just share with you. These are from Darla. This is the weekend that she was here, just some impressions. Now, one thing we don't do during this presentation is talk about facility very much. There's a whole section on the facility, 2 or 3 pages in the report that you can look at and do that. We don't ever want facility to become a replacement for engaging lost and broken people. Because here's what happens. When a church doesn't know what to do to reach lost and broken people, they do something to their building. Because we think if we shine our fish tank up, fish will jump in. Right? You know the nature of fish is not to jump in your tank. You actually got to put them there. And no matter how shiny your fish tank is, it's not going to attract fish. And so don't ever let facility become a substitute for community engagement and reaching lost and broken people. Now, the building's important. That's why we spend some time in it. But for the purpose of our report, we don't spend a lot of time there. But let me just give you our first impressions about the facility itself. The building is attractive. It's located right across from the high school ball fields, right off the main street. It's pretty easy to get to. All of those kind of pieces, it's well maintained in doing that. Signage throughout the building could enhance helping people feel comfortable with an eye out for guests. It's a little confusing as to where you're supposed to go in this whole process. From a guest perspective, just putting some sandwich signs out front, letting people know they can park on the street, church parking signs, just so people know where to go and what entrance you're supposed to go in. Because, it's either that entrance there. I didn't even know there was an entrance there until Ansel took me by the church. Oh, I didn't even know it existed. Because when you pull in the parking lot, you see one sign that says, enter here, main entrance, right? And what that looks like. And so anyway, it's just that signage from a guest perspective, helping them know where to park. Because here's the reality. Guests are often late arriving, and as a result, the parking lot is going to be full. So then where do I park? If I don't know where I'm going to park, here's what will happen. I'll go home. or go to another church. So it's just identifying. It's just helping people know. Because you got lots of parking around, right? It's just a matter of let them know that this is where you can go, and here's the entrance if you park. If I park down the road here, here's an entrance that I can go in. Because if I pulled in the parking lot, I see the main entrance. So do I park there and walk all the way back here? Or can I get in those doors? It's just signage. See, it's a guest perspective is different than what you all know. It's like going to your house. You have certain things you do in your house that if I was a guest, I wouldn't know what to do. How do I get into your house? Or whatever it might be. Same thing here. And then some updating of color, decor, and possibly a new ramp and entrance to the parking lot would be helpful. This is from Darla's perspective, helping people know how to get into this place. Can be helpful to do. Then we talked about Sunday morning. Again, this is COVID Sunday, so we get all that and what that looks like. People appear to be really glad to be together that particular Sunday. Obviously, it's different because music wasn't live yet during that weekend, but greeters were in place in the lobby. Placing some greeters outside on nice days would be incredibly helpful to help people manage the parking lots and how to get in to the facility. Again, the greeters were really engaging, but paying attention to age demographics can be incredibly helpful. Is that diplomatic enough? And what that looks like. So doing that. The worship service itself, again, because it was done a little differently. The welcome information shared was done well. Again, because of COVID, the music wasn't live, but the music that was done well, even though it was by video, but it was done well. In doing that, the band, the worship team, and the worship leader do well online. The instrumentals were executed well. The harmonizing vocals sounded pleasant. You probably all don't know this, but Darla is a worship leader. That's what she did before she joined our team. And so she looks at things totally different than me. It's like, harmonizing, what's that? So anyway, it's just done a little different in doing that. Congregation was engaged. There were verbal at times, laughter, encouraging words during the preaching, which are all encouraging kind of signs. Again, because it's COVID, it is what it is in doing that. The sound, lighting, and video issues were all executed well, so they were done well on that particular Sunday. Let me just share with you a little bit of my observations, because I do the website, social media stuff. It's areas of passion for me. The new front door of every church is its online presence. People will search for you online before they ever show up in your parking lot. So you got to know what they're finding, right? So when they Google your church or Google churches in the community, what do they find? And are you okay with what they find? And that becomes part of the question. So we did the same thing. So there's an attractive website. Site's well done, updated on a regular basis. The website is easy to navigate, has some quality logos, videos, and photos that give a real feel for the folk that attend. That's one of the things we always look for. Because when people go online, they want to know, will I fit there? Or will I be strange? Will I look weird? And quite honestly, when people look at pictures, they want to know what the dress code is at the church. Because every church has a dress code. Some churches, come as you are. I'm thinking, you do not want me to come as I am sometimes. I'm telling you right now. That's not what you mean. You mean comfortable or whatever it might be. So that's one of the reasons they look, is to see, will I fit or will I stick out? If I go there, will I be the only teenager? Or will I be the only old person? Or will I be the only young person in doing that? The church does have a Facebook page. It has 398 followers. The page has generally only been utilized to post Sunday live streams and daily devotionals. The Facebook page could be used, especially given your age demographics of the church, could be used effectively to communicate announcements, current realities, activities, things that are going on within the church. We always say if you're trying to reach 50 and over, use Facebook. If you're trying to reach those under 40, use Instagram. If you're trying to reach those under 20, use TikTok. So it all depends on what your audience is and what that looks like. Fastest growing demographic in Facebook now are 55-year-old women. It's the fastest growing demographic on Facebook right now. My kids only use Facebook so I can see the pictures of the grandkids. They post them on Instagram. They have it cross-post on Facebook so I can see them. because I'm over 50, right? And what that looks like. So anyway, there were 20 subscribers to the YouTube channel, which is pretty low based on the church size. What's that?
Wes, what's our subscriber?
What's our what?
It's 240, I think.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Maybe we're on the wrong channel. Do you have more than one channel?
No.
Huh, because when we did the subscriptions, there were 20 subscribers. So it doesn't matter. It's the whole idea of paying attention to what that looks like. It's only used for Sunday morning worship services. And so there may be 2 channels out there you don't know about. So you might want to check. You might want to Google on YouTube your channels. Because this one only had Sunday morning worship services on it. Yeah, so if you've got more than one channel, getting rid of one will be incredibly helpful. Because people can only Google you to find you, right? And what that looks like. We did not find an Instagram account, and we did not find other social medias like MeWe or TikTok. Y'all know social media is changing dramatically and quickly these days. You're always asking what's next. You know, what are people using to communicate in a world where we communicate differently than we've ever communicated before? Right now, the fastest growing social media platform for those under 20 is YouTube. It is amazing to me to watch. People will watch a video before they'll read anything. It's how people are learning these days. But the problem is they won't listen to a 45-minute recording. They'll do a 3 to 4 or 5 minute, and that's about the max, unless it's something they really enjoy. Like,
221 current subscribers, YouTube.
okay, good. So you might want to check the other channel and how we got there to do that. So, okay, so you get the report, whether it's printed or whether it's a PDF format. You can skip the first 24 pages. Okay, that's what I just did. All right, you can go to page 25, unless you're melancholy, and you will start at page 1. Because that's the only way to read a book and what that looks like. Now, if you're choleric, you can skip to page 34 and just read the recommendations, right? Just cut through the stuff. I just want to know what's up, right? So it depends on personality where you'll start. Now, if you're a sanguine, chances are you'll read page 1, then page 8, then 7, then 6, then 4, then 10, then 12, then 20. You'll be all over the place in doing that. Phlegmatics don't like to read reports because they're afraid that somebody's going to get upset. So I just rather not read it in doing that. So different personalities will have different ways of processing this report. So based on where you are, if you want to turn over to page 34, you're going to find now our observations. So up to this point, it's been reporting of your information that you all said. So starting on page 34, it's our observations and recommendations. So you'll see on page 34, some general observations just based on the material as we digest it. And I'm going to go through those, and then I'll hit the highlights of the recommendations. So just some overall observations. I've mentioned them already. Let me just summarize them. The church loves and cares for people well. And there's just no doubt about that. The church loves and cares for people well. There's a sense of unity and a high level of comfort with the current reality of the church. The current small groups are healthy, but there seems to be a need to increase participation in small groups. There is a need to develop a clear and compelling vision for the future. The vision has been from the past, now it's time for the future. There is a desire to continue to engage and reach the community more effectively. More involvement and volunteering is necessary for the church to function more effectively. There is a desire to reach a younger generation, especially in student ministry. The church needs to focus on structures for leadership and equipping and encouraging people to serve in areas which best fit their spiritual gifts. If the church is to deal with these areas and to become healthier, it will require intentional effort and work on developing a compelling vision to engage the community for Christ. To motivate personal involvement with both time and finances, the new vision and the direction of the church will need to be compelling and pacing change will be critical. Man, you all are not ready to change 10 things this week. But if we can change one or two things to become more effective and begin to show that positive response, some great things can begin to happen. So when you get the report, you're going to turn over those recommendations, and this is where your digestion and conversation will happen. All right, these are just from our reflections of the report, some things that we think are really important. They're divided into a couple of different sections. The first is in the area of leadership. I've mentioned already a couple of times the selection of a transition team. The transition team's sole purpose is to work through the recommendations and put together a strategy to begin to address those recommendations. So they're not in the pastoral search process, that's the pulpit committee. They're not in the management of the church, that's the council. They're simply taking a look at the assessment report and taking the recommendations and putting together a plan to make them happen. That transition team will be nominated by Ansel. The church council will empower them, and they will be commissioned before the church. No surprises, no secret room societies. It's just transparent and open as to what we're going to do. All right, so it makes real clear as to the role of that transition team. We believe that transition team needs to have some missing personality and leadership styles like creativity, risk-taking, the more sanguine personality as a part of that, as well as the other parts of the personality and leadership styles. So that's in the area of leadership. The second area that we talk about is spiritual renewal. We believe with all of our heart that no matter what happens in the church, it must come from the heart of God. It must be bathed in prayer. It must be a result of spiritual renewal within us and within the body of Christ. We firmly believe that prayer does not prepare us for this work. Prayer is this work. And anything good that's going to happen will come because we humbly seek God and are radically committed to being obedient to whatever He shows. So we talk about spiritual renewal. Again, calling the church to a time of prayer and seeking unity and God's will for the church during the transition. We recommend the transition team members provide and lead times of prayer during all corporate gatherings and meetings focused on praying for clear vision and unity. We recommend the interim pastor preach a series of messages focused on spiritual renewal and embracing the purpose of the church. Then we get into the area of church health, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but let me just hit the highlights. They're in a couple of different areas. Effective structures. So there's some recommendations there about evaluating current structures and ministries, making necessary changes to the structure that focuses on building trust and empowering leaders more effectively. So we're trusting and empowering them. We recommend the transition team develop clear ministry descriptions for all ministry leaders and develop an annual review process to allow different voices to speak in to the structure of the church through a review process. Then we have some recommendations on the area of gift-based ministry, helping people understand their gifts. So we recommend a leadership summit of all of those that have the spiritual gift of leadership and administration come together for a one-day retreat to talk about how to effectively empower people within their realms of responsibility. We believe it's important for us to own this, not to be dictated to. That we figure out what that looks like in the culture of our church to really trust and empower people more effectively. We recommend that the transition team develop a gift database of all those currently attending and a series of messages be preached focused on serving based on gifts, call, and passions, which would include permission to say no so you can say yes to the right things. Or to stop doing something so you can start doing something that lines up with your gifts, passions, and call. That'll shake things up just by doing that and what that looks like. And then in the area of holistic small groups, we recommend the transition team review current curriculum being used by existing small groups and with the current small group leadership, discuss how to make changes so the material is helping people answer questions that are being asked. We recommend the transition team evaluate and develop a plan to increase participation in small groups. This might include adding new groups, reorganizing existing groups, or leading an all-church small group focus during the transition period. And then the final sets of recommendations deal with communication and celebration. Hey, here's our reality. We want no one in the church to be surprised by anything that happens during the interim time. So we are going to communicate, and communicate some more. And then we're going to communicate again. So we're going to do that through a lot of different ways, all different kinds of means, whether it's a printed material, email list, town hall meetings, church meetings, during worship services, making sure everybody understands what's happening and why it's happening. Again, helping people to understand the heart so the actions make sense. And so communicate. That's why in the coming days, you'll have opportunity to have conversation about the report and the recommendations as you have a chance to digest them. Right? And Ansel will be leading those kind of times. We'll fit into the culture of the church as to what they look like. It could be a Q&A time during a town hall meeting. It may be some things that you do during the worship service, whatever that looks like, so people can be aware of what's happening and why it's happening. And then the second area of that is celebration. Hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to party. Hey, we're people of hope. Man, if there's anybody in the world that ought to be partying, it's us. Man, it's rejoicing in what God has done. Now, I know partying's different personalities, right? And how you party and how you rejoice. Some of you are loud, some of you are quiet, but all of you ought to get excited about something. Whatever that gets you excited, whatever thrills. You say, well, why are we doing that? Because we're trying to get you ready for heaven. Because heaven's going to be a party. So how do you know that? Well, it says there's more rejoicing in heaven over one lost sheep that is found than the 99 that are found. And every time a lost sheep is found, there's a party in heaven, and all of heaven rejoices. So if you don't like to party, heaven's not your place. Right? There's going to be rejoicing in heaven. So we got to just practice now, rejoicing and celebrating what God has done. Now, you could probably tell I'm a little more excitable than some, and I like to party. I like to celebrate. I'm a sports nut and a sports enthusiast. And so when my team does well, I don't just go, oh, that's nice. I mean, I cheer and holler and scream and do all those kind of things. I'm a Detroit Tigers fan. In 1984, when they won the World Series, I was in Detroit pastoring just outside the city. A guy in our church had season tickets. I went to 32 games that year. And I'm going to tell you, I sat 3 rows behind the dugout. And every time Kirk Gibson or Lance Parrish or any of those guys hit home runs, I did not go, oh, that's pretty cool. Man, I'm standing up, hollering, screaming, and hitting high fives and hugging people I don't even know. That's how I met Sparky Anderson's wife. I hugged her because she was right in front of me. You all don't care to know, but it was during the World Series, and they were playing the San Diego Padres, and 4th game of the World Series, Kirk Gibson hit a home run to win the game, and I'm going to tell you, the stadium went nuts, and I was among the nut people. In doing that. Well, I'm thinking, man, we are part of watching people's lives be transformed and their eternity changed forever. Man, we got to be people that rejoice over that. We got to join heaven in the party. That's better than any home run or any grand slam or any winning shot. That's changing somebody's life for eternity. We got to rejoice in that and celebrate. So we're going to celebrate. We're going to practice partying as we go through because we're people of hope. And we're going to communicate a message of hope to a world that desperately needs a message of hope, especially after the last 15 months. We have the message. Let's quit fighting each other and start rejoicing in who God is. Let's just celebrate who God is. We are people of hope. To us has been given the ministry of reconciliation. You and I, we get to share that message with a lost and broken world, that they can be reconciled to their Creator. Man, how exciting is that, huh? Man, may God help us to do that effectively, right? And what that begins to look like. So, communication, celebration become a part of that whole process, all right? So, again, not radical kind of changes. We're not talking about that. We're talking about doing some things a little differently to be more effective at reaching lost and broken people. We want to make sure we engage people. Hey, listen, there should be no unemployed Christians at Reedsport Church of God. Everybody ought to be engaged somewhere. Yeah, but I don't have a lot of time. No, that's an excuse, not a reason. He's called us to be his hands and feet to a lost and broken generation. So no unemployed Christians here. Everybody engaged according to your passions, your gifts, and God's call in your life. The goal of the church and the responsibility of the church is to equip you for those works of service. Not to do them all, but to equip you. We want to be able to do that more effectively during this transition period. So know that we are, and we will continue to pray for you, that this would be an incredible season of ministry for the church. So much hope, so much potential, so many resources, and to whom much is given, much is required. God, help us to be faithful to what you've given us. God, make it to be so. Would you pray with me? Father, we thank you for the Reedsport Church of God. We thank you for its history. We thank you for all that you've done and all that you are doing through the ministry of this church. Man, the countless numbers of lives that have been changed and transformed because this church has been here. We give you praise. This church has been a part of giving you reason to rejoice. We thank you for that. And Father, in the middle of where we are currently, we just confess that comfort sometimes has replaced mission. Activity has replaced transformation. So God, forgive us. Give us ability now to discern what your Spirit is trying to say to your church in the days that are ahead. We already know that this church is a lighthouse to this community. Oh, may that light shine brightly. May there be countless numbers of people's lives that will be impacted and changed forever because of the obedience of this group of people. God, I pray a blessing now that you would do immeasurably more than any of us can even think or imagine right now. That your kingdom would expand and the impact of this church would just increase. Oh, make it to be so, we pray. Give us the ability to listen, to see, to discern, and the courage to be obedient. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. God bless you. Thanks for being here tonight. I certainly appreciate it. Blessings.